سبحان الله والحمد لله لا إله إلا الله والله أكبر.
الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه يكافئ مزيدا يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك فلك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد في كل وقت وحين وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد حتى ترث الأرض ومن عليها أنت خير الوارثين. نويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير نفع انتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم ودعاء للهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. This is the vicegerency, the age of Jusru. We look at the second of the Imams of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum wa arda, Sayyiduna Umar ibn al-Khattab, the greatest of the companions of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. In accordance to the orthodox teachings of Islam, he's considered the second of the great companions of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and the second of the Shaykhan, the second of the two Shaykhs, the two elders of the companions of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And distinguished in this world as well as in the next. We looked at the first and the greatest of them, Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu warda. Of the things that distinguish Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq inside of the next world is that he is the first non-prophet to enter into paradise. And the things that distinguish Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab inside of the next world, that he's the first being to receive his book inside of his right hand radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. He's somebody of a great stature with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, evidently inshallah ta'ala as we'll cover today, and somebody no doubt whatsoever who is dear to the Messenger himself sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. This is Sa'id ibn Jubayr radiallahu anhu. He said, and the righteous of the faithful, in Surah Tahrim, this was revealed about Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, a man of great piety, of great righteousness radiallahu anhu warda. And as we see, a man who brings forth the greatest of the generations of the Muslims, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, great in his generation, of the greatest in the generation with the child or the children that he brought forth, the likes of his son Sayyidina Abdullah, the likes of his daughter Sayyidina Hafsa, the mother of the believers, the greatest of the generations that come thereafter, the likes of his grandson Sayyidina Salim ibn Abdullah, and the likes of his great grandson Sayyidina Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the great Caliph. The Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda is somebody who generation after generation produces the greatest people, those who work at the highest sort of echelons of the religion of himself. But obviously our durus, inshallah, next few durus, is to look at the great Imam himself radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. But I think what's amazing about the statement of Sayyidina Sa'id ibn Jubayr, Sa'id ibn Jubayr considered of the Imams of the Tabi'een, the most knowledgeable and the most pious people of that generation, the second generation of students of the Sahaba, one of the primary students of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas. But what's amazing about the statement of Sayyidina Sa'id ibn Jubayr radiallahu anhu warda is when we consider that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from beyond seven heavens is speaking about Umar ibn Khattab. And in particular, Quran speaking about a very, very particular individual. The Quran always has generic signification, and every one of us can find ourselves inside of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But no doubt most of us, we have to search deep. And we need to access people of a very discerning eye. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, مَا فَرَّطْنَا فِي الْكِتَابِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ, that we've not abandoned anything inside of the book. But the likes of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the likes of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, that their dhikr, their mentioning inside of the Quran is very evident, okay? And this is something one no doubt whatsoever, it alludes to their lofty stature as it relates to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We try to busy ourselves, we try to strive to be of those who make mention of God, make mention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala busies himself with making mention of such people. Why? Because they're beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he renders what? Their name immortal. eternal, mentioned in the heavens as well as upon earth. These are great people, because they were people who extended benefit to humanity, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, amma ma yanfa'u nas, as for that which benefits people, فَيَمْكُثْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, that it will remain upon the face of planet earth. And the dhikr of such people remains upon planet earth, as in the hadith in the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, because ththese people are mahbubuna ila Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're extremely beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Prophet ﷺ said in the Sahih of al-Bukhari, إِذَا حَبَّ اللَّهُ عَبْدًا, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a slave, nada Jibreel, he summons Gabriel, and he says to Gabriel alayhi salam, إِنِّي أُحِبُّ فُلَانًا, verily I love so and so, فَأَحِبُّهُ, so love him. فَأَحَبُّهُ Jibreel, the Prophet ﷺ said, so Gabriel loves him. And when Gabriel loves a person, nada ila ahl sama, that he calls out to the heavens, to the people of the heavens, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ فُلَانًا, verily Allah loves so and so, فَأَحِبُّهُ, so love him. And the Prophet ﷺ says, فَإِذَا أَحَبُّهُ, and so when they love him, يُوضَعَ لَهُ الْقَبُولُ فِي الْأَرْضِ, then acceptance upon earth is granted to that individual. From the signs of such acceptance upon earth is that person becomes madhkur, becomes mentioned on the tongues of the greats, okay, of the people of righteousness and piety and proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those people are ultimately, as the Prophet ﷺ called them, muhaddithun, mulhimun, mutakallimun in the hadith, in the Sahih of al-Bukhari. Those people who were inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that their tongues are closely aligned with the speech of the divine, such that which they utter is based upon the fact that it's something uttered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and spoken about in the heavens. هكذا Umar ibn al-Khattab. This is the nature of the great Imam of the believer, Sayyiduna Umar ibn al-Khattab. Madhkur, means somebody who is mentioned prior to his manifestation upon the earth. Mentioned. Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, his reality, mudawwan, inscribed inside of the Torah in and of itself. Not somebody who's just revealed, spoken about inside of the Quran, but he's somebody who's also spoken about by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the original manifestation of the Torah. And not only the original manifestation of the Torah, but even after the inhiraf, even after the Torah was doctored, the mentioning of Umar ibn al-Khattab still remained. Up until the very keys of Jerusalem were handed into the hands of Umar ibn al-Khattab in and of himself. He's the Fatih. He's the great opener of Sham. He's the Fatih. He's the great opener of the Iraq and that which lies beyond the great river. He's the Fatih. He's the great opener of Egypt in and of itself. We're going to see after the great but very brief period of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu warda, we're going to see the expansion of Islam explode under the actual leadership of this great Imam of the Muslims, whose name is Umar ibn al-Khattab, the one who is appointed by name by Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu warda. He's the only one of the Imams who's going to be appointed by the one who held office previous to him. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu warda is not going to be explicitly appointed by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he's somebody who the Imams of the Sahaba converge upon. Umar ibn al-Khattab is going to be appointed by Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu warda. And what we see that the people are swifter to Umar ibn al-Khattab than they were to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu warda. As we studied, for reasons that there's going to be a delay on behalf of certain elements of Ahlul Islam to give in the bay'ah unto Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu warda. We see no such delay whatsoever on the manifestation of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. Somebody the Ummah absolutely concurred upon, the great Imam. A very, very complex individual, Sayyidina Umar. We look at the statement who the Imam as-Subki rahimahullah ta'ala makes when he speaks about one of the great Imams of Islam, Sayyidina Abu Hamid al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. And he brings the statement by As'ad al-Mihani, when he said, nobody can really know the superiority and the vastness of the knowledge of al-Ghazali except he who has attained or almost attained a perfection of intellect. And what he's trying to state here, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, is the complexity of the greats of Ahlul Islam, like Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, that he's a very extremely complex being, radiallahu anhu warda. And only somebody who's attained a near perfection or an actual perfection of intellect is able to have isti'ab, true comprehension of whom Abu Hamid al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala was. As a qaida, as a rule, to understand Ghazali, you have to be of Ghazali or beyond him. You have to be of the rank of al-Ghazali or beyond the rank of al-Ghazali. Hakada Abu Hamid al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the most influential figures inside of Islam. And if that is Sayyidina al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, فَكَيْفَ بِعُمَرَ ibn al-Khattab? What then about Umar ibn al-Khattab? Who for amongst the Sahaba, he's an extremely complex human being. Very complex, that you should never take a statement or an act of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab at face value. And beyond it is like supreme intellect and vastness of spirit. And the only one we can sort of really compare in that type of complexity to Umar ibn al-Khattab, as we'll see, is Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib. And they're very, very similar, Sayyidina Umar and Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu ta'ala anhum warda, but they're extremely complex figures, very, very complex. Okay, and it needs complex and advanced minds as well as advanced spirits to truly try to understand exactly what they are doing in any given moment. Okay, this is the commentary of Sayyidina Tajuddin al-Subki, rahimahullah ta'ala, who's the one who brought the statement in his famous work, which is called the Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya. It's called the biographies of the Imams of the Shafi'i school of jurisprudence, which is one of the greatest biographical works ever written by Ahlul Islam, the hands of the Muslims. It's a masterpiece in how a biography of an individual should be written, authored. He says, the statement, I find this statement about al-Ghazali extremely interesting, as the one who seeks to understand the true rank of anyone who is superior to him must possess intellect and understanding. As with the intellect he is able to distinguish, and as with understanding he is able to adjudicate, to pronounce judgment upon the nature of a person or upon the nature of any single act that comes forth from that person in particular. What we're trying to sort of allude to here by bringing that statement is that Umar ibn al-Khattab is an extremely complex individual. And nobody should ever rush to judgment except people of profundity of intellect as to what Umar is doing or why. What is the motive behind why Umar ibn al-Khattab performs a single act. Okay? And what is notable, as many of us know about Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda, he's the one who narrates the actual great tradition. Many great traditions come forth on the tongue of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. Of the most oft tradition ever mentioned on the tongues of the people Sharqan wa Gharban of Islam, east and west of Islam, is the hadith in the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. That entire tradition rests upon Umar ibn al-Khattab, rests upon him. And he's the only sound link in the chain of the companions. And it's probably the most oft mentioned tradition, period, in Islam, on behalf of the Prophet ﷺ. Imam al-Bukhari opens up his Sahih with that. Imam al-Nawawi opens up virtually all of his works. Riyadh al-Salihin, Arba'in al-Nawawiyah, opens it up with this tradition that was related on behalf of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. Likewise, other traditions, and very famous axiomatic traditions, as an example, the hadith in Sahih Muslim of Jibreel alayhi salam, Gabriel. And in that question, in that tradition, we see that the tradition revolves around a series of questions, 5 questions, that were leveled by Jibreel at the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And what we see that the questioning is one of the greatest ways to access knowledge. The nature of knowledge rests upon a question. And that's what Umar ibn al-Khattab himself said, nisful ilm husn su'al. He said half of knowledge is a good question. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu used to say. And one of the things which is interesting is that the hadith of questioning the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam on behalf of Gabriel, and it comes at the tongue of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. Although we have other traditions related on behalf of Sayyidina Abu Hurairah, related on behalf of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas and others, who also have narrations of the very same incident, the hadith of Gabriel, hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, the one that the Ummah took to, that is rendered sound, it's got the stamp of authority by Imam Muslim inside of a Sahih, is the one of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. And one of the things that we sort of get from that is that the art of questioning, the art of how knowledge is acquired. Gabriel shows that, إِنَّهُ جِبْرِيلٌ أَتَاكُمْ يُعَلِّمُكُمْ دِينَكُمْ. Remember, the end of the hadith is not Ya Aba Hurairah. The end of the hadith is not Ya Abdullah ibn Abbas. But the end of the hadith is Ya Umar. It's the Prophet ﷺ addressing the great Umar ibn al-Khattab, Ya Umar, أَتَدْرِي مَنِ السَّائِلِ. Do you know who the questioner was? Either the Prophet seeks out Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar ibn al-Khattab with adab, with the Prophet ﷺ, because Umar is strikingly intelligent. He's he's of those who not only the Prophet ﷺ speaks about Umar ibn al-Khattab in the context of revelation, in the context of Nabuwah, saying Umar ibn al-Khattab, but the Prophet ﷺ dreams about Umar ibn al-Khattab. Subhanallah. We're struggling to dream about the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And have you ever wondered what were the dreams the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had, in knowledge of the fact that the dreams of the Prophets are all revelatory in nature? The dreams of prophets is communicate from the divine subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how many times in the Sahih al-Bukhari, how many times in the Sahih al-Muslim, in the chapter of dreams, is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam dreaming about Sayyiduna Umar ibn al-Khattab? In his dreams, is the Prophet ﷺ interacting with Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab? In his dreams, is the Prophet ﷺ engaging the realities of Umar ibn al-Khattab in the next world, fil Jannah, inside of paradise? In the dreams of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, and of the dreams that the Prophet ﷺ experienced with Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, one of the things he tells us about Umar, when kayfa awwaltahu ya Rasulullah, how did you interpret this dream? The Prophet ﷺ said, al-ilm, knowledge, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu warda, of yani profundity of intellect, Sayyidina Umar. And he's the one who could ask the Prophet when the Prophet ﷺ informed him of the interrogation of the grave. And Munkar and Nakir. And we're interrogated in the grave by these two, and in opinions, three angels who will interrogate every single believer who is placed inside of the grave. When Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab heard of that and the question, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab said to the Prophet ﷺ a very, very simple but striking question. Alana, u'uquluna yawma idhin. On that day, will we have our intellects with us when we're inside of the grave? And the Prophet ﷺ said, Na'am ya Umar. Yeah, human beings will have their intellect, will be fully conscious inside of the grave. Umar ibn al-Khattab said, Khalas, no problem. And he, so long as I have my intellect with me inside of the grave, I'm saying this to the Rasul. Make dua for me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yuthabbitni ala qawli thabit. Make dua that Allah ta'ala fames me upon a fame word, or the like. And he would say something to get the barakah of the Rasul that would protect us inside of the grave. Umar ibn al-Khattab, khalas. No problem. So long as my intellect is with me in the grave, I'm fine. And there's a riwayah of those who saw Umar ibn al-Khattab in a dream after his death. And Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda, when Munkar and Nakir entered upon Umar ibn al-Khattab inside of the grave, and they asked the first question, Men Rabbuka, who is your Lord? Umar ibn al-Khattab said to them, Men Rabbukuma antuma, who is your Lord? I'm the questioner today. That's Umar ibn al-Khattab, was somebody of striking intellect, radiallahu anhu warda, and that no doubt has to underpin, the intelligence, profundity of his intelligence has to underpin any approach to Umar ibn al-Khattab, whenever he speaks, whenever he does an act. You're going to hear many times saying Umar ibn al-Khattab as if he's questioning, in a negative sense, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. No, khalas. And that's an erroneous interpretation. Umar ever questioned the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. You see Umar ibn al-Khattab questioning Sahaba, like saying that Hassan ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu in the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when he's reciting poetry. Umar ibn al-Khattab, and he questioning Sayyidina Hassan about something he already has knowledge of. فَعَجِّبْنَا لَهُ أَيَسْأَلُهُ وَيُصَدِّقُهُ. That's what Umar ibn al-Khattab said in the hadith of Gabriel. We were amazed at this individual who would ask a question to the Prophet ﷺ, وَيُصَدِّقُهُ, and say, صَدَقْتَ, that you've spoken the truth. Because by you say you've spoken the truth, it's a sign that you already have knowledge of something. So thereby, for why are you asking the question? If you already know the answer, إِنَّهُ جَبْرِيلٌ أَتَاكُمْ يُعَلِّمُكُمْ دِينَكُمْ. It was Gabriel who came by virtue of those questions to teach you your religion, not to teach him the religion of Islam, not to teach him the reality of Iman, not to teach him the haqiqah, the reality of Ihsan, but to teach you. And by virtue of questions, often you see Umar ibn al-Khattab with that profundity of intellect now begin to teach those in his presence, to cast the doubt out of the heart of those in his presence by a series of questions that he asks, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. And the man of profound certainty, knowledge inside of the deen of Islam is tantamount to certainty. And that's why one of the most amazing commentaries you see upon the nature of Umar is by the great Imam Abu Abdullah Ibn Abi Jamra radiallahu anhu warda, the commentary Andalusi, the great Spanish Imam who commentates on Sahih al-Bukhari, some consider him the greatest commentator ever radiallahu anhu warda. And when we looked at the actual passing, the flight of the Prophet ﷺ, and the reaction of Umar ibn al-Khattab to the actual passing of the Prophet ﷺ, you don't really understand what has taken place. Don't take that at face value. Umar ibn al-Khattab, sword unsheathed. Whoever says that the Prophet ﷺ has passed, I will strike them with this sword. Yani you see most commentators that Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda had lost control of himself due to the faqd of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and losing of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the passing of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ibn Abi Jamrah negates it, Umar ibn al-Khattab losing his intellect. Because one thing we know about Umar ibn al-Khattab, thabat. And absolute firmness when other people lose it. We know that about Umar. We'll see it through his life, radiallahu anhu warda. طيب. Let's engage the Imam, his name and his lineage. His name is Abu Hafs Umar ibn al-Khattab ibn Nufail ibn Abdul Uzza ibn Riyah ibn Abdullah ibn Qard ibn Razah ibn Adi ibn Ka'ab ibn Lu'ay ibn Ghalib al-Qurayshi al-Adawi al-Faruq radiallahu ta'ala anhu Amir al-Mu'mineen, the prince of the believers radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. So we look at his name in order to gather a sense of who Umar ibn al-Khattab is, because no doubt his name ultimately is encapsulated, his reality is ultimately encapsulated inside of his name. Abu Hafs is his kunya. That's his kunya radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. Kunya is by name, his nickname, which is sunnah, as we've learned. The Prophet ﷺ's kunya is what? Is Abu Qasim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Abu Zahra, Abu Fatima sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi wa sallam. Abu Hafs. I know to be Abu Hafs, that was a name given to him by the Prophet ﷺ. Because we note, as some of them state, that it's Abu Hafs, not Abu Hafsa. Okay? Naam, he's the father of Hafsa, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, the mother of the believers. But his kunya is Abu Hafs, Abu Hafs. And some say it doesn't relate to his daughter Hafsa. But Hafs is one of the 300 names in the Arabic language for a lion, Abu Hafs. So the kunya that the Prophet ﷺ gives Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab of them is that what he is the father of the lion. And what does that mean? He possesses the quality of a lion, bravery. Okay, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. There's a tradition Ibn Abi Jamrah rahimahullah ta'ala brings in his commentary on al-Bukhari that speaks about the 4 imams of the Sahaba as they relate to the Prophet ﷺ, in which the Prophet ﷺ says, Ana Madinatul Sakha, I am the citadel of munificence, generosity, wa Abu Bakr babuha, wa ana Madinatul Shuja', and I am the citadel of bravery, wa Umar babuha, wa ana Madinatul Iffa, and I am the citadel of temperance, the control of your nafs, wa Uthman babuha, wa ana Madinatul Ilm, wa Ali babuha, and Ali is what? The gateway to what? To that citadel. The Prophet ﷺ says. In relation to Umar ibn al-Khattab, that he is what? The gateway to the citadel of bravery. He's a very, very courageous individual, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. The Sahaba, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, they said, we never saw anybody from amongst the Sahaba like Umar ibn al-Khattab when it came to bravery. And when it came to the lack of fear, no fear whatsoever. And Umar ibn al-Khattab, interestingly, look why it's important to know who he is, where he's from. He relates that to his childhood, and in particular to his father, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda, who instilled in him not just bravery, but the lack of fear, absence of fear. That the only fear Umar ibn al-Khattab had was fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's something that came from his childhood, in the way his father himself raised him. So he's a person of immense, of great bravery, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Hafs. لا يخاف لومة لائم. It says of the great quality that he has no fear whatsoever of the criticizer, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. We mentioned people dream, and people used to dream about Umar. We mentioned of the companion Auf ibn Malik al-Khuza'i, that he had a dream of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. And in the dream is in the time of Abu Bakr, last days of Abu Bakr, when he goes on to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and he says, I saw inside of a dream called Jama' an-Nas, the human beings had been gathered on the mawqif, the plains of judgment. And I saw that there was a man who was elevated above everybody else. ثلاثة أذرع, 3 أذرع, يعني 3 arms length. Okay, elevated above everybody else. فسألت من هو? I asked who is it? He said Umar ibn al-Khattab. He said that's Umar ibn al-Khattab, distinguished from everybody on the day of judgment. He says walima, what distinguishes him, Umar ibn al-Khattab? He mentions from amongst them 3 qualities. He said 3 qualities distinguish Umar ibn al-Khattab. أول في شيء لا يخاف لومة لائم. He has no fear whatsoever of criticism and the criticizer. As we know inside of the Quran, that is one of the distinguishing characteristics of the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That they have no fear whatsoever of the criticism of the criticizer. The second, وهو الخليفة المستخلف. That he is the caliph in waiting. And then the third, هو الشهيد المستشهد. He is what? A martyr that is actively seeking martyrdom, in search of martyrdom, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. Tayyib, yani, Sayyidina Auf bin Malik radiallahu anhu, he goes to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq when he awakes after seeing this dream. And he mentions it to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And Abu Bakr anhu is the supreme interpretator of dreams amongst the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Will you not give glad tidings to Umar? That's an amazing dream, Yawm al-Qiyamah. Tubashir Umar. So they went and called Umar ibn al-Khattab. And Abu Bakr then says to Sayyidina Auf bin Malik, Yani khalas qussa alayhi al-ru'ya. And relate to him the dream. And then Sayyidina Auf begins to relate the dream to Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Yani to Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab about what occurred. Until he reaches the point where he says in the dream, the man says, Huwa al-Khalifatul Mustakhlaf. He's the Caliph in waiting. Umar ibn al-Khattab says, Uskut, be silent. You would dare say that to me with Abu Bakr hayy, whilst Abu Bakr is living? You would dare say that? Because the implication of the dream is the death of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu warda, and the ascendancy of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. That's the implication of the dream from its meanings. And not only is it implication of the dream, but إِذَا عُبِّرَ وَقَعَ. The Prophet ﷺ said, when dreams are interpreted, khalas, imprinted, they occur. So you're even hastening, quote unquote, the actual death of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq by relating that type of dream. Okay? Umar uskut, and Umar walks, doesn't allow him to finish the dream. Sayyidina Auf radiallahu anhu warda said, after the passing of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, I was walking past the masjid, and Umar ibn Khattab is upon the mimbar. He's standing up on the mimbar. فَنَادَانِي, and he called me. He said, khalas, now finish the dream now. Finish the dream. And then Auf radiallahu anhu finishes the dream that you are a martyr who's actively in search of martyrdom. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu says, martyrdom? But where would I ever get martyrdom from? He said, I dispatched the armies to the four corners of the earth, and here I am in the midst of Medina. How am I going to get martyrdom whilst I'm in the midst of Medina, and battle is beyond Medina to Al-Munawwara? Hafsa radiallahu anha wardaha, the sidq of Umar ibn Khattab, she said that her father often, consistently used to pray for martyrdom. And he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He's decreed it, it will reach me even in the midst of Medina to Munawwara. And hakada, it came to pass. How the Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab was martyred in the midst of Medina, the epicenter, right in the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So he's Abu Hafs, we'll see a man of immense bravery, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, as named by the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And even if somebody was a coward and was thereby named Abu Hafs, khalas, yanfajr, bravery would explode from them. That's the reality of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Yughayir al-ahwal, transforms the states of human beings. Hakadha Umar ibn Khattab. What about if the asl is bravery? If your nature is bravery, then the Prophet gives that the stamp of authority. How? What the type of quantum leap he took in that regard? His name is Umar radiallahu anhu wardan. His father is al-Khattab, Umar ibn Khattab. Okay, as you learn that his father was somebody of great prominence in his age. Umar ibn Khattab, the father of al-Khattab, but he was also somebody who was extremely stern, and also likewise somebody who was an idolater, very firm in idolatry. And any manifestation of anything which would go against idolatry, he would be extremely opposed to it. And that's going to dictate the early years of Umar ibn Khattab, who's very opposed to the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. Khattab, the father of the Prophet ﷺ, has several brothers, from amongst them Zayd, from amongst them somebody called Ammar. He has a brother called Ammar. Okay? The son of Ammar is called Zayd. Very famous man. Imam Bukhari has an entire chapter upon him. His name is Zayd bin Ammar bin Nufail. Okay, Zayd bin Ammar bin Nufail. Zayd bin Ammar bin Nufail. So Ammar is the brother of al-Khattab, and his son is called Zayd. Imam radiallahu anhu warda. His son, famous, of the 10 people guaranteed paradise, Sa'id ibn Zayd. That's the son of Zayd bin Ammar bin Nufail. He was the Imam of monotheism inside of his time. Sahih Bukhari taught monotheism of what are called those early udul, those early hunafa, the people who deviated from the social norm of taghut, of idolatry, and professed oneness in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in anticipation for the manifestation of final prophecy, and of these makarim al-akhlaq, these higher virtues of character. But when he used to proclaim oneness, belief in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Umar ibn Khattab's father, Khattab, used to torture and oppress his own nephew, Zayd bin Ammar bin Nufail, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. Of those who the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, he lived alone, but he'd be raised as an entire nation. Zayd bin Amr bin Nawfal. Yub'ath Ummah. The Prophet ﷺ said about the great Imam of what? Of Jahiliyyah, Zayd bin Amr bin Nawfal. Okay? So this is Khattab, Nufail bin Abdul Uzza bin Riyah bin Abdullah bin Qarb bin Rizah ibn Adi. And that's the one you underline, Adi. Because that Adi there is the most prominent forefather of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Okay? That's why from Quraysh, he's from one of the 12 tribes of Quraysh, who's known as Banu Adi. Banu Adi. Okay? So he's going to consider an Adawi. Like you see at the end, Al-Adawi. Al-Faruq. The Adawi means he relates back to the most prominent of his forefathers, who's Adi. And they're one of the 12 tribes of Quraysh, a very, very important tribe. And anytime you hear the name Adawi, there could be many different types of Adawis. Of the Imams who wrote it, Sam'ani and others who deal with the nature of Ansab, Nasab, lineages of people. In Sam'ani, he reports five different tribes of the Arabs known as Banu Adi and the Adawis. Others say 10. There are 10 different Adawi tribes, all differ. But this is the most prominent of them, which is the Qurayshi Adawi tribe. The Qurayshi Adawi tribe that Umar ibn al-Khattab belonged to, radiallahu anhu warda. And they're going to be very famous in Jahiliyyah for their ability to negotiate and to adjudicate. Two things. They were negotiators, diplomats. So the Quraysh would dispatch Banu Adi if they ever wanted any type of diplomatic solution, especially in terms of war. If Quraysh were going to war, that the sunnah of Jahiliyyah, which becomes the sunnah of Islam, is first you dispatch the peacemaker, the diplomat, the negotiator, in order to settle things upon peaceful terms. They would send Banu Adi in order to fulfill that. And you would see that with whom? With Sayyiduna Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, even his grandfather, of the famous ones, his grandfather Nufail, was of those who would negotiate on behalf of the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ, Abdul Muttalib, settle disputes that maybe people had with the very grandfather of the Rasul himself. So Banu Adi were very famous for their ability to negotiate, but especially their ability to adjudicate, to judge. So they were considered the judges inside of Mecca. And that's important because that's Umar's context. Umar becomes synonymous with justice, the ability to adjudicate. Umar ibn al-Khattab, of the Imams of the law, of the most foremost Imams of the law that the Prophet ﷺ introduces. And that's why you see when the Prophet ﷺ is at Safa, when he's at Safa and he summons the tribes of Quraysh, Ya Banu Fihr, the Prophet ﷺ says, summon the tribe of Fihr. Fihr ibn Malik, Quraysh. That means all Quraysh. He summons. Then who does he single out? Ya Banu Adi. He summons Banu Adi. They say, why is he now summoning Banu Adi? I need judges who are present, who are going to adjudicate my affair. He singles out Quraysh. Then from Quraysh, he singles out only Banu Adi. The Prophet ﷺ summons them to be present. That's the nature of the Adawiyun, that they were the ones of quote-unquote justice. But justice means adjudicating or judging in accordance with the societal norm, the accepted norm in society. So when the accepted norm is idolatry and tughyan, tyranny and oppression, then they will adjudicate in relation to that, and they will live that to the T. And Umar ibn al-Khattab is the prodigal son of Jahiliyyah, prodigal son of Kufr. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. All the virtues that Quraysh had in Jahiliyyah, you're going to see them espoused by Umar ibn al-Khattab. But then when he enters into Islam and engages a new set of virtues, radiallahu anhu warda, although not exclusively, Umar ibn al-Khattab becomes the great embodiment of those also, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. Ibn Ka'b, Adi ibn Ka'b, which means there that Ka'b ibn Lu'ay, his lineage meets with the Prophet ﷺ. Ka'b ibn Lu'ay. That's what the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ meets with the lineage of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Which tells us that in terms of blood, Abu Bakr, who's Taym bin Murrah, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu warda, is closer in lineage to the Prophet ﷺ than Umar ibn al-Khattab is. That's one thing it tells us, the first when we compare the two Imams. The second, it also tells us that the Prophet ﷺ is one generation closer than Umar. Because in Ka'b ibn Lu'ay is the 7th father of the Prophet ﷺ. Ka'b ibn Lu'ay is the 8th father of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. Which means the Prophet ﷺ, although we're not going to have a great amount of years between the Prophet ﷺ and Sayyidina Umar, 13 years between the Prophet ﷺ and Umar, the Prophet ﷺ is one generation ahead of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. He's al-Qurayshi, we said he's from the tribe of Quraysh, Banu Adi being one of the 12 tribes of Quraysh, Adawi, as we said, and he's al-Faruq radiallahu anhu warda. Once again named by the Prophet ﷺ, Al-Faruq, the distinguisher. أي الذي يفرق بين الحق والباطل. The Prophet ﷺ said, the one who distinguishes between truth and falsehood. هكذا. That's Umar ibn al-Khattab. He has the ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood. That statement there is the definition, the most critical definition we have of tens of definition of intelligence, tens of different types of definition the ulama of Islam, especially in theology, bring forth as to what is true intelligence. The most critical definition of intelligence and the purpose of intellect, تفرق بين الحق والباطل, to distinguish between truth and falsehood. And that is the very name the Prophet ﷺ gave the great Imam himself, Sayyiduna Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. The last of them we make mention of, which is not present here, is Amirul Mu'mineen. Amirul Mu'mineen, Umar ibn al-Khattab. Like Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, and Amirul Mu'mineen, Abu Hafsin, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول. So Imam al-Nawawi, Amirul Mu'mineen. That's the title of Umar ibn al-Khattab, the leader of the faithful. And he's the first person in history to be called the leader of the faithful. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, as an official title, although they say that Abdullah ibn Jahash of the martyrs of Uhud, Abdullah ibn Jahash, who's buried in the same grave as Sayyidina Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, Abdullah ibn Jahash radiallahu anhu warda, fi hayat al-Rasul, in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was also called Amir al-Mu'mineen. But it wasn't like a title that he held because he held an official office, just a name they gave Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Jahash. In terms of the official office, Umar ibn al-Khattab is the first one to be named Amir al-Mu'mineen. Okay, and this is after the death of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And it revolved around the title of vicegerency, of Khilafat. And what should my title be? Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is Khalifatul Rasulillah, the Caliph of the Messenger of Allah, the vicegerent of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Umar ibn Khattab says, so what should you call me? Khalifatul Khalifati. That's what you're going to call me, the Caliph of the Caliph, the vicegerent of the vicegerent of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَإِذَنْ يَطُولُ, he said, فَإِذَنْ يَطُولُ, then it will be too long. That's not too long, is it? Khalifa to Khalifa. They say one of the nature of intelligence is tadabbur in the Arabic language. Tadabbur is that you think of how it all plays out. You're not in the moment, you're just way beyond the moment. Intelligent people, they think of how the whole thing concludes. So Umar ibn Khattab here, his intelligence, he's thinking about how does the whole Khilafat, representation of the Prophet ﷺ conclude. So when we get 30, 40, 50 generations down the line, Khalifatu, Khalifati, 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 Khalifati. Then you're told, yani khalas for those 30 generations later, they're going to have a long title. It's so long for him, radiallahu anhu warda. On the basis of that, Umar ibn Khattab says, la. He says, think of a better title for me. And then there's differences of opinion as to who actually brings the title. Some say it's the Imam Mughira ibn Shu'bah, radiallahu anhu warda. When he addressed Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab, Mughira ibn Shu'bah is going to be placed as one of the governors of Umar ibn Khattab in Iraq. And then he addresses Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab by saying, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. Oh, Amir al-Mu'mineen. هذا هو Umar ibn Khattab. Naam, yani khalas. Embrace the way. Others, and it's not necessarily mutually exclusive, that they related to the great two companions. One is Adi ibn Hatim. And we mentioned Adi ibn Hatim in the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. The great negotiator, the great peacemaker, Adi ibn Hatim, saved tribes from the sword, of whom Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid, the one who used to feed his ants, say حقوق الجار, the rights of neighbors, he used to feed ants, radiallahu anhu wa ra. That's Adi ibn Hatim, and it's mashallah, great stature with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then likewise whom Labid ibn Rabi'a, Labid ibn Rabi'a, the second Labid ibn Rabi'a, he's of the greatest poets ever. أصدق الكلمة قالها شاعر قول اللبيد لا كل شيء ما خلا الله باطل. Allah Ta'ala said the greatest word, the Prophet ﷺ said, the greatest word a poet ever uttered was the word of Labid. It's Labid ibn Rabi'a. ألا كل شيء ما خلا الله باطل. Is everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not false? He said, Sayyidina Labid radiallahu anhu warda. Those two were summoned by Umar ibn Khattab from the new open territory of Ahlul Islam. And when they arrive in Medinatul Munawwara, Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As is like the secretary of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab. So they speak to Amr ibn al-As and they say, where's the Amir al-Mu'mineen? And Amr ibn al-As is again of those Sahaba who's characterized by striking intelligence. Got it, that's it. We've been searching for the title for Umar ibn Khattab. And then Amr ibn al-As enters upon Umar ibn Khattab and says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. And Umar ibn Khattab says, where did you get that name from? He said, the two out there, Labid and whom and Adi, are calling you Amir al-Mu'mineen. Umar ibn Khattab said, Hadahu. This is it. And from that moment, the title stuck. And every single Caliph in the history of Islam, after Umar ibn Khattab adopted that title, Amir al-Mu'mineen. But the first of them officially was this Imam, radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa arda, Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab. His mother is Hantama, the daughter of Hashim ibn al-Mughira, ibn Abdullah, ibn Umar, ibn Makhzoom al-Makhzoomiyah. Okay? So from his father's side, he's from Banu Adi, which is one of the 12 tribes of Quraysh. But from his mother's side, he's from Banu Makhzoom. He's a Makhzoomi. You see, the end of his name is Umar ibn Makhzoom ibn Yaqaba. Makhzoom ibn Yaqaba. So he's a Makhzoomi from his mother's side. Okay? Likewise, so we get a greater sense of it. There are differences of opinion as to who his actual grandfather was. Hantama, the daughter of Hashim. His mother's Hantama. She's the daughter of Hashim, and that's where most have it. The likes of Ibn Hajar has it, Ibn Abdul Bar, Jazam, Ibn Abdul Bar, that his grandfather's name on his mother's side was Hashim. But others, like Imam al-Dhahabi and others, they tend towards what? The grandfather being Hisham. Okay? Hantama, the daughter of Hisham, they say. And that's an important difference. The two real people, Hashim and Hisham, are brothers. Both of them sons of the great al-Mughira. That al-Mughira there, in his time, is considered one of the most important men in Quraysh. He's the leader of the armies of Quraysh, al-Mughira. Remember, he's the father of Walid ibn Mughira, the grandfather of Khalid ibn Walid, radiallahu anhu warda. And a very, very famous man in Jahiliyyah, al-Mughira. So he has many sons, a lot of sons. From amongst them here, Hashim and Hisham. What's the point? Is that if the father of Hantama is Hisham, it means Hantama is the sister of Abu Jahl. That's what it means. That's because Abu Jahl is Amr ibn Hisham ibn al-Mughira. Okay? So if her father was Hisham, it means she's the sister of Abu Jahl. But if her father, as here, which we preferred, is Hashim, it means she's the direct cousin of Abu Jahl in and of himself. Okay? But ala kulli hal, Umar ibn Khattab is going to have a very strong relationship with Abu Jahl, Amr ibn Hisham inside of Jahiliyyah. And that relationship is severed upon the actual Islam of Umar ibn Khattab. From the tribe of Makhzoom, they were the ones who had what? Mecca upon lockdown. We look at the features of Umar ibn Khattab. What did Umar ibn Khattab and he look like? Here the Imam of fiqh, law and hadith, Imam Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah ta'ala, related in the authority of Zir ibn Hubaysh, who said, I saw Umar and he was of a very dark complexion, shadid al-udma. And he said that's the way that the Imams like Qadi Iyad, the likes of Ibn Abdul Barr and others, when they describe Umar ibn Khattab. The Umar ibn Khattab in terms of his complexion was extremely dark. Khafif al-Aradain, that in terms of his beard, it was a light beard here, radiallahu anhu warda. He had a very, very long moustache that actually towards the ends began to turn up. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. Asla' means he was bald. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, yani tawir. And some say extremely shiddatul tul. Umar ibn Khattab min rijal al-sudus, they would call him. Umar ibn Khattab was extremely tall in height. What they call min rijal al-sudus. And what does rijal al-sudus mean? He was people of like extreme height. Remember the Prophet ﷺ in Bukhari and others, kana rab'a min al-qawm. Rab'a min al-qawm. He was of average height. Rab'a, it relates to 4. Sudus relates to 6. Okay? Sudus relates to 6. What does 4 mean? Arm's length. Dhira'a. Arm's length. That's what it relates to. Most are going to have, an arm's length is between 48 to 52 centimeters. Differences, 48 to 52 centimeters. When you look at the history of the dhira'a is never beneath 42, never more than 52. In whatever culture, ancient measurement, and that's the measurements of this world and the next world. The Prophet ﷺ said, Yawm al-Qiyamah, people are 60 dhira'a in height. The Prophet ﷺ said. Here, the Prophet ﷺ was just above 4 dhira'a in height. Okay, just above 4, which is what? Above 2 meters. In height, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, over 6 foot in height. The Prophet ﷺ in terms of his height. Umar ibn Khattab, 6. If you took it that way, although you give it a bit of leniency, half 6, 3, added to 6, you got around 9. Sudus they call him. He was like over 8 foot in height. Huge. Umar, a giant. Umar ibn Khattab. Yeah, someone sits upon a horse. Everyone sat upon a horse. When you sit upon a horse, an average man, the bottom of their feet is at the stomach of the horse. Look, if you mount a horse, look where your feet are. They're at the stomach of the horse, nowhere near the ground. Umar, if he sat upon a horse, his feet are on the ground. That's Umar. He's called min al-Mukhattatun. Mukhattatun, that they would sit upon a horse, smack the horse, and then their feet would draw lines in the sand. They're trying to show you how tall they were. From amongst them, Umar ibn al-Khattab, from amongst them, Amr ibn Hisham, Abu Jahl was like that. Some mentioned Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib was like that, huge, towering in height. They would say they would go to Hajj, and they would see people making tawaf around the Kaaba, and you just see this head and shoulders above the rest. There's Umar, yani khalas. Huge, like a giant in terms of his height, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. But still, the sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, إِذَا مَاشَى أَحَدَ أَوْ جَالَسَ أَحَدْ, when he sat alongside and he want to walk alongside anybody, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam أطول منه, is taller than him. Nobody was ever taller than the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the presence of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. وَإِذَا فَارَقْ, but when they left the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, نُسِبَ إِلَيْهِ الطُّولِ, they would say he's tall, وَنُسِبَ إِلَيْهِ الرَّبَعْ, and they would say the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was of Raba', average height sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But Sayyiduna Umar, extremely tall. He said he was what? He kind of yaruh. Yani means that when he walked, he was quick stepped, very, very fast. He said the walk of Umar ibn al-Khattab was like the run of others. Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. And he would walk extremely fast. And he used to love to walk. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda would walk for miles. As we've seen a great incident when he goes to Jerusalem to take the keys of Jerusalem, Umar ibn al-Khattab with his slave is alternating upon the horse, upon the riding beast, upon the camel, the riding beast. Yeah, you ride, then I ride, you ride. Umar's khalas, he just used to walking until they arrive at Jerusalem. Whose turn is it to ride? It's the slave of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar said, it's your turn. He said, how am I going to enter into Jerusalem and I'm riding and you're alongside the beast? Umar ibn al-Khattab says, justice, it's just, it's your turn, ride. And that's how Umar enters into Jerusalem. He's walking the beast of his slave. Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. Okay? طيب, descriptions of Umar. Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Hilal bin Abdullah, I saw him, he was of dark complexion and extremely large in height. Radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa arda. Wives. Umar ibn al-Khattab is going to have a lot of women inside of his life. Of some narrations, Umar ibn al-Khattab, who's going to die at 63 years of age, although there are other opinions. But the one Ahlul Islam preferred that he dies at the same age of the Prophet ﷺ at 63 years of age. Although there's opinions he died at 60, there's opinions he died at 52, opinions he died at 55, others that he died at 58. And some say that's a stronger opinion. But Ahlul Islam, that they preferred, was the opinion that he died upon the same age as the Prophet ﷺ, 63 years of age. But inside of that period of time, Umar ibn Khattab, and he marries over 30 different women. 30, Umar ibn Khattab. Okay, different to Abu Bakr in that regard. Abu Bakr, as we related, four wives Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu warda has. And Abu Bakr has periods when he's wifeless. He doesn't have a wife. And after the death of the mother of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha wa ardaha, Abu Bakr doesn't marry till the death of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. Okay, it's Ba'd al-Uhud. After Uhud is the death of the mother of Aisha. Okay, the mother of Aisha. And Abu Bakr is going to remain without a wife until after Khaybar, Mu'tah. After the death of Ja'far, and then Asma bint Umays, the wife of Ja'far, now she is unmarried. Abu Bakr marries Asma bint Umays. And Abu Bakr, and he has a different approach to that. But Umar ibn Khattab, khalas, over 30 women he marries, radiallahu anhu warda. Of them, we're going to mention a few of them. Prior to Islam, Umar had 3 wives. Qariba, the daughter of Abu Umayyah al-Makhzumi. Okay, Qariba, the daughter of Abu Umayyah al-Makhzumi. Kulthum, Malaika ibn Jarwal al-Khuza'i, of which only Zainab, the daughter of Mad'un, converted alongside him. She's the third one, Afwan. She was to give birth to Hafsa, Abdullah and Abdul Rahman. Okay, so these are the 3 wives of Sayyidina Umar before his Islam. The first one, Qariba, the daughter of Abu Umayyah al-Makhzumi. And that Qariba, the daughter of Abu Umayyah there, he is one of the sons of al-Mughira. Okay, of al-Mughira, who's going to be the great-grandfather of Umar, Umar from his mother, Hantama, the daughter of Hashim or Hisham, who are the sons of Mughira. Okay, so Qariba, the daughter of Abu Umayyah, who's the son of Mughira. But what does that tell you about Qariba? That she is the sister of Hind, the daughter of Abu Umayyah. Who's Hind, the daughter of Abu Umayyah? She's Salama, the great wife of the Prophet ﷺ. Umar ibn Khattab in Jahiliyyah, he's married to the sister of the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, Qariba, daughter of Abu Umayyah al-Makhzumiyah. She doesn't enter into Islam when he enters into Islam. Okay, first. Second of the Kulthum, Malaika ibn Jarwal al-Khuza'iyya. Likewise, she doesn't enter into Islam when Umar enters into Islam. This is pre-Islam Jahiliyyah. The third of them is Zainab, the daughter of Mad'un, who converted alongside him. Okay, she, again, here, where do we relate here to? The great companion, Uthman ibn Mad'un. Uthman ibn Mad'un, radiallahu anhu, the old friend of the Prophet in Jahiliyyah and Islam. Of opinions, the first one to die in Medina, first one to be buried in Baqi', in the great graveyard, greatest graveyard, Uthman ibn Mad'un. This is his sister Zainab bint Mad'un. And that is the wife of Umar ibn Khattab in Jahiliyyah, and she converts alongside him, and she's the one who gives birth to the greatest of Sayyiduna Umar ibn Khattab's children. On one hand, Hafsa, the older one, Hafsa, who becomes the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after Uhud. When a husband is martyred in the battle of Uhud, Hafsa is then thereby going to be married to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then the second is the great Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Khattab, Imam Abdullah ibn Umar. He is the most radical of all the companions upon the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Nobody's more radical. Nobody is more radical upon the Sunnah than Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. Raised by his father, he became the greatest of the Muslims, such that the Prophet ﷺ, such that Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, on the advice of the companions, had to, despite the advice of the companions, had to barred his son from becoming the next Caliph. They were advising Umar to appoint Abdullah ibn Umar as the next Caliph. Umar ibn Khattab says, La. Look at him, he said, it's enough on Yawm al-Qiyamah that there's one of my family who answers for this affair. Enough. That's it. That's enough. I don't want another one of my family answering for the affair of the Muslims on the Day of Judgment. And so he barred Abdullah ibn Umar from becoming the next Caliph, but he appointed him as one of those who would choose. That's why there's going to be 7 people who choose the next Caliph, but 6 can be elected, 1 can't. The one who cannot is his own son, Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. As we know, it ends in the election of Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu warda. So the great Abdullah, Imam of the companions, mashallah, tabarakallah. Look at Umar, tells us, Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, where all of us should live is the mosque. That's what he says, Ghazali. He says, your natural home is the mosque. But if there's some reason that you can't live in the mosque, like wife and kids, that's sort of a good excuse. If you know wife and kids, you don't really have an excuse. But he said, if some reason you can't live in the mosque, then he tells us then how we should live. Al-Ghazali, in his Ihya Ulumuddin, Abdullah ibn Umar lived in the mosque. Father kicked him out, sent him to the masjid. That's where you live, in the masjid of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's where he was raised, amongst Ahlul Suffah. And you see the effect that it had upon the great Abdullah ibn Umar to be raised amongst these great people who were totally totally severed themselves from the world. And then he has another son called Abdul Rahman, likewise, of his other sons. Then these to Zainab bint Mad'un. We look at them again, the wives of Sayyidina Umar. Of the wives, we mentioned 10 of them. Zainab bint Mad'un, we made mention of Qariba, Abu Umayyah al-Makhzumiyah. Likewise, we made mention of in Jahiliyyah, Kulthum, Malaika, the daughter of Jarwal al-Khuzai, al-Khuza'iyah, made mention of here in Jahiliyyah. 4, Kulthum, the daughter of Ali ibn Abi Talib and Fatima Zahra al-Batul. The wives of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, that Ali ibn Abi Talib marries from the Bid'ah, from the sacred lineage, marries his daughter, and her mother is Fatima Zahra, radiallahu ta'ala anha wa alayhi salam, marries her to Umar ibn al-Khattab. Kulthum, the daughter of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and they have 2 or 3 children together. Hakim, the daughter of Al-Harith ibn Hisham, who is the ex-wife of Ikramah ibn Abi Jahl. After Ikramah is going to be martyred at the Battle of Yarmouk. The Battle of Yarmouk. Sayyidina Ikramah is going to be martyred, radiallahu anhu warda. His wife, Hakim, she marries Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. I remember here, Hakim, she's the intelligent one, the mother of Hakim. And wise one. She's the one who saves Ikramah. And Ikramah, after Fath Mecca, and the Prophet ﷺ has placed a death warrant, literally for execution of Ikrimah. Ikrimah heads to the port of Arabia and he's taken to the Red Sea to sail over to Abyssinia to escape the Prophet ﷺ. And his wife Hakim, she's the one who catches him. And she tells him, come back. He forgives everybody who goes and seeks clemency. Ikrimah says, he will never forgive me. She says, he will forgive you. Come back with me, he'll forgive you. He says, you go back to him and you bring me a guarantee that he will forgive me before I come back. He thought it was inconceivable that the Prophet doesn't forgive him for his crimes. She says, well, I've already been to him. And she brings out the rida. She brings out the actual scarf of the Prophet ﷺ. Look what he gave me. You've got safe passage on the basis of the rida. Well, what did he do? Saying Ikrimah radiallahu anhu returns back to Medina to Munawwara and enters upon the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ's first words to saying Ikrimah radiallahu anhu warda is, I knew good would come from your father. Okay, I knew good would come from your father. His father's Abu Jahl. He said, but I knew good would come from your father. And it comes in the form of the great Ikrimah. Abu Jahl dies as a shaheed. Shaheed in Yarmouk. Shaheed out of preferring his brother radiallahu anhu wa arda. Saying Ikrimah radiallahu anhu wa arda. And you see him and his cousins radiallahu anhu warda, that they're dying at the end of the battle. So as they bring in water for him to drink, Ikrimah goes, go to the next one. They go to the next one. The next one says, go to the next one, the third. He needs it more than me. They go to the third one. He said, go to Ikrimah. They go back to Ikrimah. Ikrimah is dead. Go back to the second, dead. Third, dead. All of them died radiallahu anhu, preferring their brother on the battlefield radiallahu anhu warda, just with water. This is why Hakim, she married Sayyiduna Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda after the death of Ikrimah. Yani Su'ayda, the daughter of Rafi', likewise, Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab was married to her of his wives. Jamila, the daughter of Asim, daughter of Thabit, okay? Like Jamila, who's the daughter of Asim, that she has a son called Asim to Umar ibn Khattab, and Asim has a daughter, and that daughter is the mother of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the great Caliph. So it's from Jamila, the daughter of Asim bin Thabit, and that's how the lineage of Sayyidina Umar ibn Abdul Aziz ties to Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. These are the great grandchildren of Umar, Sayyidina Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and no wonder that he shares essentially the same qualities as Umar ibn Khattab. Justice is associated with Umar ibn Khattab, and justice is also associated with whom? The great Caliph, Banu Umayyah, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Atika, the daughter of Zayd bin Amr bin Nufail, okay, as you see there, that's like a cousin of Umar, Zayd bin Amr bin Nufail. She's the sister of Sa'id ibn Zayd, of the 10 who's guaranteed paradise. And she's the former wife of Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr, of Abu Bakr's son. And after the death of Umar ibn Khattab, she marries Zubayr ibn Awam, radiallahu anhu. Then Luhayya al-Yamaniya, a woman from the Yemen, who he married, and then Fukayha. They're of the women he married, and there are another 20 that they make mention of that Umar ibn Khattab married at varying points in his life, radiallahu ta'ala anhu wardahu. Okay? Tayyib, inshallah ta'ala. We're going to now look at some of the virtues of Umar, ibn Khattab. Okay, as stated by the Prophet ﷺ and those who knew him best. Okay. First, we see here Shaqiq related to us. I heard Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman radiallahu anhu say, once whilst we were sitting with Umar, he suddenly said, which one of you has memorized the words of the Prophet ﷺ on tribulations? He said, the tribulations of a man with respect to his family, his wealth, his child and his neighbor, is expiated by prayer, charity, commanding good and forbidding evil. He, Umar ibn Khattab, said, this is not what I meant, rather the one that flows like the waves of the sea. So he said, you have no need to worry, O leader of the faithful, as between you and it is a door that has been bolted shut. So this is a conversation between Umar ibn Khattab, the great companion, and Sayyidina Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman, the great companion. Yani the most knowledgeable of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ as it relates to asrar, secrets, the secrets of the Prophet ﷺ. That's why Sayyidina Hudhayfa is known Sahib al-Sir. He's known as the bearer of the prophetic secret. Sayyidina Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu warda. And he was somebody who was very close to Umar ibn al-Khattab. And they did share a love for that type of knowledge. You look at the traditions in which what is related that the Prophet ﷺ taught everything that had occurred from the beginning of time to the end of time, i.e. when eternality begins, Ahl Jannah into Jannah, Ahl Nar into Nar. The two primary companions who relate that tradition and say they embrace that knowledge was Hudhayfa ibn Yaman and Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. And those who remember, and those who forgot. Hudhayfa would say. So you would see a strong affinity in life between these two Imams radiallahu anhu warda. Umar ibn al-Khattab never used to go to janazah save that Hudayfa was there. Before, when someone died in Medina, has Hudayfa gone to the janazah? Umar would say. If they said yes, he would go. If they said no, Hudayfa's not there, Umar wouldn't go. Why? Because Hudayfa knows the munafiqun. He knows who the hypocrites are. And if Hudayfa don't go to janazah, it could very well mean the one who's been buried is a munafiq, is a hypocrite. Umar wouldn't go. Umar showing you of his virtues, he interrogates Sayyidina Hudayfa. I swear by Allah, you must tell me, ana minhum. Am I from amongst them? Who does he mean, the munafiqun? Hudayfa radiallahu anhu says to Umar, because you've swore by Allah Ta'ala for me to tell you, I will tell you. But by Allah, he makes an oath, I will never tell anyone after you. It's an amana the Prophet ﷺ gave me. You're testing that amana. And he says to Umar ibn al-Khattab, because you made the oath, I will now tell you, lasta minhum. You're not from them. You're not from the munafiqun. And he said, Ibn Khaldun radiallahu anhu warda, when he looks at the history of spirituality, it's a great work by Ibn Khaldun radiallahu anhu, he looks at the history of spirituality as it manifested in the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu. Ibn Khaldun there, he looks at the nature of what? Of spiritual states, and he brings that tradition of Umar ibn Khattab and Hudayfa. And he says, what was Umar asking about? He said, Umar wasn't asking about nifaq al-jali, he wasn't asking about evident hypocrisy. He said, because evident hypocrisy, someone knows they're a hypocrite. And evident hypocrisy is that you're just pretending to be a Muslim and you know you're not. And that's what Hudayfa knew. But, he said, Umar was asking about something different, which shows you who Umar was, but also shows you who Hudayfa was. What was he asking about? Ibn Khaldun says, he was asking about the type of hypocrisy that the one who has it doesn't know that they have. They're oblivious to it. It's buried deep in the subconscious, that type of hypocrisy. He said, Hudayfa, he said, that's one of the greatest compliments Hudayfa could ever pay Umar. That no, and you have zero hypocrisy. Zero. Not even in the depths of the subconscious, Umar ibn Khattab, does he have any type of hypocritical trait. But it also shows you who Hudayfa is, the knowledge of Hudayfa. And subhanAllah, Hudayfa could gaze into the depths of somebody's subconscious and and ascertain whether they were from them or not. Umar was not from them. On this occasion, Hudayfa says, I was sitting with Umar and he suddenly said, which one of you has memorized the word of the Prophet ﷺ on tribulations? Hudayfa said, the tribulations of a man with respect to his family, his wealth, his child, his neighbor, is expiated by prayer, charity, commanding good and forbidding evil. And what's important here, Hudayfa has sussed out Umar. He's read Umar's mind, read his heart. And Hudayfa now is trying to shift Umar away from the question he's trying to ask to distract Umar. Umar ibn Khattab's not falling for it. Umar said, this is not what I meant. And the subtle innuendo here, you knew it's not what I meant. Don't try and distract me here. He said, what I'm speaking about is this fitna that flows, kamoj al-bahar, like the waves of the sea. So he said, you have no need to worry, Umar ibn Khattab says. Hudayfa said, you have no need to worry, O leader of the faithful, as between you and it is a door that has been bolted shut. And who said I had a need to worry? Who's speaking about me? Hudayfa, there's a silent conversation going on that Hudayfa is privy to and wants to distract Umar from, but Umar ain't having it. So Hudayfa now, khalas, you want to face the reality, you have no need to worry whatsoever. Between you and that tribulation that comes like the wave of the seas is a door that is bolted shut. Umar presses the issue further. Umar asks, is the door broken down or opened? Hudayfa says, no, it's broken down. Yeah, they're broken down. Umar said, then it would never be bolted shut thereafter. That's their conversation. If you were there, you'd be scratching your head. What are they going on about? Umar and Hudayfa having this sort of conversation of symbols in the dream world, or the like. So I said, indeed, we asked Hudayfa, and this is related by Abdullah ibn Abbas, riwayah, Ali ibn Abi Talib also, and asked Hudayfa, did Umar know the door? What was the symbolism of the door that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about? Hudayfa said, he replied, yes. Just as he knows that night precedes the morrow. Night comes before day in Islam. This man's aligned to Islam, the reality of Islam. And that is because his words are not subject to folly. When Umar speaks, it's haqq, as we will see. We thereby wanted to ask him who was the door. So the tabi'in here, Shariq and others, we ordered Masruq, the great tabi'i, ask Hudayfa, who's the door? And Hudhayfa replied, Umar. Umar was the door. What when Sayyidina Ali bin Abi Talib and Abdullah bin Abbas asked about the dream, the same dream, yet the same reality, the symbolism of the Prophet and the fitna, spoken about the door. Why does Umar ask, will it be opened or will it be broken down? As you see, will the door be broken down or open? And then Hudhayfa says, broken down. Umar is asking about his own death there. He's the door being smashed open means he's going to be killed violently. If he said open, he'd die of natural causes. That's what it meant. And Umar now is asking, how am I going to die? That's a silent conversation. That's why Hudhayfa is trying to avoid it. And we don't want to go there. When Umar pushes the issue, khalas. You want to know, khalas. And Umar masroor, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Huwa shaheed al-mustashhad. He's the martyr in search of martyrdom. He wants to know, wants tahqiq of that. Although we heard the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in Sahih al-Bukhari, ihtaz Uhud, when Uhud shook. Another riwayah, Hira, happens in Mecca and Medina. Show you it's the narrative of both cities. When it shook, and the Prophet ﷺ stamps upon Uhud, and stamps upon Hira, and the Prophet ﷺ says, be still, O Hira, be still, O Uhud. The riwayah is very riwayah brought them, because upon you is a prophet with shahidain, and two martyrs. The Prophet ﷺ said, riwayah upon you is a prophet, a siddiq, and two martyrs. The Prophet ﷺ said. And then he mentioned other martyrs. Upon you is a prophet, a siddiq, and martyrs. Because in riwayahs, Sayyidina Zubayr was also present, Sayyidina Talha was also present, Uthman was also present, Ali radhiyallahu anhu was also present. Speaking about the outcome of these great companions who surrounded him sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But Umar was called a shaheed, present with the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam upon the Mount Hira as well as the Mount Uhud. And the authority of Abdullah ibn Abbas, who said, the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, verily I have two ministers from amongst the inhabitants of the skies and two ministers from amongst the inhabitants of earth. My two ministers from amongst the inhabitants of the skies are Gabriel and Michael, Jibreel and Mikael. And my two ministers from amongst the inhabitants of earth are Abu Bakr and Umar. They're the reflection of those heavenly bodies upon the earth for the Prophet ﷺ. Supreme companions, those two, the Shaykhan. On the authority of Abdullah ibn Umar, one day the Messenger of God ﷺ went out and entered the mosque alongside Abu Bakr and Umar, holding their hands. He said, this is how we shall be raised on the day of rising. Hadith in Tirmidhi. You enter the mosque and you've got the hands of Abu Bakr and Umar. We're going to be raised like this on the day of judgment, the Prophet ﷺ said. Abu Bakr and Umar, right next to the Prophet ﷺ, both of them are buried. Abu Bakr, as we said, at the sort of chest of the Prophet ﷺ, and Umar at the feet of Abu Bakr. That's where he's buried, radiallahu anhu warda, fi jiwar al-Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Proximity to the Rasul. How many times the Prophet ﷺ, Ali bin Abi Talib, upon the death of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, Ali ibn Abi Talib enters and sees the body of Umar ibn al-Khattab lying in state, and he begins to praise Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. And he says, how many times did we hear the Prophet ﷺ, me and Abu Bakr and Umar went to so-and-so. I remember the days of me and Abu Bakr, just reminiscing about him and Abu Bakr and Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ. And Ali was saying this, how many times did we hear the Rasul speak about me and Abu Bakr and Umar used to go to such a place. Once upon a time, me, Abu Bakr and Umar sat or ate in such and such a place. Always mentioning those two companions who were always present alongside the Prophet ﷺ. Look at the neighbor of the Rasul ﷺ, the Jewish boy. He's on his deathbed and the Prophet goes to visit him. And the Prophet ﷺ say a word and I'll guarantee your safety inside of the next world. And the Jewish boy turns towards his father, Kamustashir. He's seeking advice from his father. And his father says to him, Ati' Abul Qasim. Obey Abul Qasim. فَإِنَّهُ لَا يَأْمُرْ إِلَّا بِخَيْرٍ. Because he only commands to good. And then he says, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. He utters the Shahada, فَفَادَ رُوحَهُ. As soon as he says the Shahada, he dies. The young Jewish boy dies. Alhamdulillah. Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ leaves, dragging his rida and shout, Alhamdulillah. All praise is due to Allah, الَّذِي أَنْقَضَهُ بِيَّهُ, who saved him through me. Then in tradition, you read, and you bashir sahibay Abu Bakr and Umar. Facing on his mind, he wants to tell the good news to Abu Bakr and Umar. The Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Hakada. On the authority of Hudhayfa, who said, the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, follow those after me, Abu Bakr and Umar. Hadith in Tirmidhi and Ahmad. On the authority of Burayda, a black slave girl came to the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, just after he returned back from war, and said, verily I swore an oath that if God returned you back safely, then I would beat the drum in your presence. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you swore an oath, then fulfill it. She thereby began to beat the drum. Abu Bakr entered and she continued to beat the drum, and thereby when Umar entered, she placed the drum behind her, stopped drumming, and she was veiled, muqanna'a. The Messenger of God ﷺ thereby said, verily Satan flees from you, O Umar. Everybody's scared of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Also that she's not doing anything satanic. She's not doing anything wrong beating the drum in front of the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because in Sharia, you can only make an oath upon that which is halal. You can't make an oath upon that which is haram. If it was haram, the Prophet would not have told her to fulfill it. That's one of the proofs that the ulama are going to use. That's why it's there in Abu Dawood. And usually when you see Abu Dawood, it means law. And that's the hadith of Abu Dawood, that they focused upon the law, the Sharia. That's what he gathers the great Imam radiallahu anhu warda. But Umar enters, it's another story altogether. And the Prophet ﷺ is sitting with women from Quraysh inside of his house. Happens on several occasions, sitting with women from Quraysh inside of his house. Aliyat as-sawt, that they're just raising their voices over the Rasul ﷺ. You can't hear the Prophet ﷺ, but the women are all loud over the Messenger ﷺ. Umar ibn al-Khattab asked permission to enter. As soon as Umar asked permission to enter, the women scatter. They all begin to run and hide behind the veil. And Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he enters, the Prophet ﷺ is smiling. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the Prophet ﷺ, and Umar asked the Prophet, Adhak Allahu sinnak ya Rasulullah. May Allah make you smile even more, O Messenger of Allah. But what does that make you smile? And the Prophet ﷺ said, the women were sitting with me now. And that when they heard your voice, they all got scared and dashed behind the curtain. The Prophet ﷺ said. So Umar then begins to address the women. Oh, enemies of yourselves, he begins to shout. Oh, enemies of yourselves, you have hayba, awe of me. When the Prophet ﷺ has a greater right to be held in awe. And the women then begin to shout back at Umar ibn al-Khattab. So as for you, anta ahab wa aghlab. You're hard and harsh-hearted. They say to Umar, Prophet says I'm soft and gentle. You are different. Different. And the Prophet is laughing. He says, yeah, Umar. He says, oh, Umar, were you to tasluk, were you to walk down a path and the devil to meet you, لَسَلَكَ طَرِيقًا غَيْرَ عُمَرٍ. He would choose a different path, Umar, radiallahu, and the devil would choose a different path from Umar. In another riwayah, the Prophet said, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَيَفِرُّ مِنْ ذِلْ عُمَرٍ. The devil, when he sees the shadow of Umar, not Umar, just the shadow, runs in the opposite direction. Shaitan al-Rajim, from Umar ibn al-Khattab. And somebody, Muhab, Sayyiduna Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. But complexity is here with Umar. On the authority of Aisha, who said the Messenger of God ﷺ said, amongst nations there used to exist those in whom truth was inspired. Muhaddithun, the Prophet ﷺ calls them, which means mulhimun. They're inspired, they speak with the tongue of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inspired by He Jalla Jalaluh. If there is any such person amongst my nation, then it is Umar ibn al-Khattab. We see him inspired as we get to, and the authority of Uqba ibn Amir, who said the Messenger of God ﷺ said, if there was a prophet after me, it would have been Umar ibn al-Khattab. لو كان نبيا بعدي لكان عمر بن الخطاب ولكن لا نبي بعدي. But there's no prophet after me. Umar radiallahu anhu, كيف كلام? You don't hear that about anybody else. Abu Bakr or Uthman or Ali. Umar, if there was a prophet, it would have been Umar. But there's no prophet after me. The sifat of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. And we look at the sifat to say, no, Umar, he had the sifat of Musa and Nuh. And the Prophet ﷺ said the battle of Badr. And the Prophet seeks advice from Umar ibn al-Khattab and Abu Bakr as to what should you do? What should we do with the prisoners of the battle of Badr? Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu warda takes the way of clemency and leniency. He says, ransom them, spare their lives and ransom them. Okay, those that can pay the ransom, then they leave back to their families. Those that can't, then you command them to teach 10 Muslims how to read and write, and that is their ransom. That's Abu Bakr's advice. Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, kill them all, every one of them, execute them. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda says. The Prophet turns towards Abu Bakr and says, Abu Bakr, as for you, you're like Ibrahim and what? And Isa. You're like Abraham and Jesus. That's the type of heart you are. Ya Umar, as for you, you're like Musa and Nuh. You're like Moses and Noah. Then people who pray against their own people for destruction, those two prophets. But you see, he has the reality of Prophet Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, as in the case of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, likewise. Okay? We'll mention some of the dreams, inshallah ta'ala. In conclusion, again, it's all about the virtues of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. Before we look at his life in our forthcoming sessions, on the authority of Abdullah ibn Umar, who said the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, whilst I was at a well drawing water from it, Abu Bakr and Umar came. Abu Bakr thereby took hold of the bucket and drew a bucket load or 2 bucket loads. The dream of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And we said a bucket load or 2 bucket loads. We looked at the hadith before. It refers to the term, quote unquote, of office of Abu Bakr. That's a symbolism. However, there was a weakness in his draw, so God forgave him. And he couldn't draw more than that, meaning he wasn't going to live longer than that after me. 2 years. The bucket load is symbolic for the year. Okay? Thereafter, Umar ibn Khattab took hold of it from the hand of Abu Bakr. That's now been passed to him. Anointed, appointed as the next vicegerent, Caliph. And it transformed inside of his hand into a leather bucket, facilitation. And I've never seen a leader of people excel in such a manner until people satisfied their thirst and took residency therein. So many symbols in that. Umar is drawing water after water after water, which looks at the length of his khilafat. Over 10 years, he's going to be in office for, Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. Until people satisfy their thirst, it becomes a time of aman, absolute aman, safety. To the point that Sahaba radiallahu anhu wardahum said, we put away our swords. There was no longer fear inside of Medina Munawwara or inside of the polity of Islam. Okay? And took residency therein. Umar ibn Khattab is the greatest builder of Ahl al-Islam, of cities, civilization, Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab. He's the one who commands Kufa to be built, commands Basra to be built, commands Fustat, Cairo to be built. Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, the builder of cities, civilizations, places where people could actually take residency, and in under very, very safe conditions. The nature of his cities were very, very special cities, garrison cities, cities that were fortified and protected, not only by walls that would protect them, but also by standing army. The first time you see a standing army in Islam is under the commandment of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. On the authority of Ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Umar, the son of Umar, who said, I heard the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam say, once whilst I was sleeping, I was presented with a bowl of milk. I thereby drank from it until I was so replenished that I saw it flowing in my fingernails. I thereafter gave my remnants to Umar. They asked, how did you interpret that? He replied, ilm, knowledge. It's the inheritance of Umar ibn Khattab, prophetic knowledge that he takes from the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, direct from him. But in the dream state, Prophet is dreaming of Umar inside of this reality radiallahu anhu. And you always see a connection between the milk of the Prophet ﷺ and the dream state, and knowledge, regardless of whether it's the wake state or the dream state. Hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu warda, then the Prophet ﷺ, all what's left is the su'ah. And Abu Hurairah drinks from the milk of the Prophet ﷺ, ilm, knowledge. Hadith of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas, when he's sitting beside the Prophet ﷺ, 9 years of age, and on the left of the Prophet ﷺ is whom Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid. And the Prophet is given milk from Maymuna, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, Sayyiduna Maymuna, she gives him a bowl of milk. Maymuna is both she's the auntie of Khalid ibn Walid and auntie of Abdullah ibn Abbas, auntie. Okay? And so Maymuna hands milk to the Prophet ﷺ, he drinks from it. Then he turns towards Abdullah ibn Abbas and says, Abdullah, it's your turn to drink. However, if you prefer Khalid, then that's also good. Because Khalid ibn Walid is an elder, I prefer him. But you're to the right. Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas takes it from the Prophet ﷺ, 9-year-old boy, says, I would never ever prefer anybody over your remnants. And drinks from the actual milk without giving it to Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. Ilm, Abdullah ibn Abbas. You see the connection between it, the milk of the Prophet ﷺ and knowledge. We're here in the dream state. Al-ilm, the Prophet ﷺ said. In the riwayah, al-ilm, twice. He repeats it sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. On the authority of Abdullah ibn Umar, who said, I heard the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam say, once whilst I was sleeping, I saw people being shown to me wearing shirts, hummus, shirts, some which reached the breasts, so they're exposed, others which reached down further than that. Umar passed by me wearing a shirt that was dragging behind him the length of cloth that Umar ibn al-Khattab had. How did you interpret that? They asked the Prophet ﷺ. Deen, religion. He has an abundance of religion. Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. Dreams of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. You see others, like of the tradition Sahih al-Bukhari. Imam al-Bukhari brings it in the chapter of the virtues of Umar. The virtues of Umar ibn al-Khattab. But the first traditions he brings, there are several which are similar. For amongst them, dakhaltu fil jannah. I entered into paradise. And it's a riwayah fil nawm, in the dream state. فَإِذَا بِجَنْبِ رُمَيْسَى. Besides me was Rumaysa, the Prophet ﷺ. Rumaysa is the mother of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu warda, the great woman. Then he says, سَمِعْتُ خَشَفَ. I hear khashafa, yani amami, in front of me. Khashafa is like the sound that a snake makes. Like I hear a rustle in front of me. And some say it's the sound that, yani, of footsteps, somebody's footsteps. But also it's like I hear a rustle and bustle in front of me. And there I ask, man, who is that? Bilal al-Habashi radiallahu anhu warda. فَرَأَيْتُ al-Qasar. So I saw a palace of the greatest palaces I've ever seen. And another riwayah in al-Bukhari, in Sahih al-Bukhari, the chapter of dreams, that there was a woman besides the actual palace taking water from one of the rivers of paradise. فَسَأَلْ. So I asked, liman, who is this palace? لِأَنَّنِي حَمَمْتُ أَنْ أَدْخُلُ. Because I had the desire to go into this palace, the most amazing palace I've ever seen. And they said, هذا لعمر ibn al-Khattab. Riwayah, هذا لرجل من القريش. This is a man from Quraysh. Another riwayah, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, at that point, in Saraft, I turned away. Why? لأني ذكرت خيرة عمر. Because I remember the jealousy of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar is a jealous man, Umar radiallahu anhu warda. And the Prophet related the dream to Umar ibn al-Khattab. فَبَكَى Umar. Umar begins to cry. He said, أَيُغَارْ عَلَيْكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. Would anyone ever be jealous of you? Tarbir crying, radiallahu anhu warda, Umar ibn al-Khattab. You see, when we look at the features of Umar ibn al-Khattab, from his features, Umar ibn al-Khattab had lines etched in his face. Lines, permanent lines in his face, because he cried so much. Umar ibn al-Khattab cried so much that he had lines etched in his face. Began to cry when the Prophet ﷺ told him, I remembered your jealousy of you. Sahaba are not jealous of the Rasul ﷺ. Look at the Prophet ﷺ with Sayyiduna Asma. Sayyiduna Asma, the daughter of Abu Bakr. When Asma, who used to go to the plantations outside of Medina, and she used to gather the date stones, Asma. She used to gather the date stones in order to crush them to feed the animals. But she'd walk for miles, she'd have a basket, gather them inside the plantation, from the permission of the owner of the plantation, put them in the basket, and then she'd put the basket on top of her head, and then she'd just walk back to Medina, saying that Asma anhu in the tradition. This occasion she's walking back, and then she sees the Prophet ﷺ riding, and the Prophet sees Asma, jump on the back, I'll take you back to Medina. Asma, no. And he get on the back. Asma, no. So she just walks, Prophet just leaves her, khalas, heads back to Medina. She won't get on the back of the beast with the Prophet ﷺ. She gets back to Medina, she goes straight to her husband Zubair ibn Awam. She tells Zubair, another one of those, jealous man, saying to Zubair radiallahu anhu warda. She tells Zubair, what happened? And the Prophet tried to get me on the back of his beast. I said no. And Sayyidina Zubair said, you should have. And he get on the back of the beast of the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, nobody's jealous. Nobody has suspicions about the Prophet ﷺ. It should have got on the back. You would have become from those elite companions of the Rasul ﷺ who rode the same beast as him. From the elite. You can name them one by one, those who were on the very same beast as the Prophet ﷺ. You missed your chance. Yeah, they should have got on and said, Asma radiallahu anha warda. And Umar, when he hears that, begins to cry. Soft-hearted Umar, enters upon the Prophet, Hadith al-Bukhari. When the first time he gets to see the Rasul inside of his personal house, how he sleeps, and the Prophet sits up, and he's been sleeping upon his mattress was made out of date and palm branches. Yani raw, such that they made they imprinted upon his back. So you could see the Prophet, he had all the marks upon his back due to the mattress that he slept upon. Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab baka, begins to cry. He just cries. Why are you crying, Ibn al-Khattab? The Prophet says. And Umar ibn al-Khattab says, I see how the kings of the world live. And he was an ambassador in Jahiliyyah, as we will do in our next session. He was an ambassador in Jahiliyyah. I see how the kings of the world live. Anta Rasulullah, you're the messenger of God. Look how you live. How you live. It's like what we call the type of poverty that would make Umar cry. And we can't imagine that. We haven't seen poverty that brings tears to our eyes, have we? Majority of us. And he saw it, say, Umar, cry. At how the Prophet ﷺ lived. And the Prophet ﷺ tells him something different. Ya ibn al-Khattab, are you not happy? Allahumma dunya wa lana al-akhirah. You're not happy that they have the dunya, we have the akhirah. And alhamdulillah, praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hakada Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa warda. Inshallah, we're going to finish there, inshallah ta'ala. If anyone has any questions, inshallah, we're going to continue with the virtues of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and then we begin to look at elements of his life, his conversion, and as well as how his life in and around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Mecca, but especially inside the Medina Munawwara, and thereafter we'll look at his khilafat radiallahu anhu warda. Anyone have any questions? Any questions?
You mentioned that Hazrat Abu Bakr was described as being like Sayyiduna Ibrahim and Sayyiduna Isa, and Umar like Musa and Nuh alayhi salam. Is there any mention of Sayyiduna Uthman, who he was like, or Sayyiduna Ali, who they were like?
Yani Sayyidina Uthman, Allah Ta'ala alam, hadith of the Prophet sallallahu Sayyidina Ali like Sayyidina Harun, Sayyidina Ali like Sayyidina Harun. The Prophet sallallahu says, you are to me like Harun was to Musa, to Shabah. The Prophet sallallahu says, with Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu.
With his, the appearance of Sayyidina Umar, so we mentioned how tall he is. I mean, was he like built as well?
Yeah, Umar was a prodigal son, as we'll see, built, very built, Umar ibn al-Khattab. And a very powerful person, supreme wrestler, Umar. Umar used to go into championships with the greatest Arabs in wrestling. At the Iqab, they'd have championships every single year. At the Hajj, at the Iqab, Umar would enter, rarely lost. He said most championships he won that he entered into, wrestling, supreme wrestler, radiallahu anhu. Supreme horseman, Umar ibn al-Khattab was a supreme horseman. He said it's as if he was created upon a horse. That's what he said, as if he was created, just like, as if a horse was an extension of him. Supreme rider of a horse, Umar ibn al-Khattab, could do all tricks. As big as he is, we usually think somebody who's big, they're not that athletic. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda, he would do this, take his right hand, hold his left ear, jump through his hands onto a horse. And do all athletic stunts onto a horse. That's what he's doing radiallahu anhu warda. So he's somebody of supreme athleticism. Even we look at the biography of Khalid ibn Walid, who trained Khalid? Umar. Umar is like the uncle of Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu warda, seen as his uncle. Okay, that Umar radiallahu anhu reared Khalid ibn Walid in wrestling. And until the day came, they said, when Khalid ibn Walid was able to throw Umar ibn al-Khattab, and that was the last time they ever wrestled. And Umar radiallahu anhu at that point, now khalas, you become a man now. Now you know how to handle yourself. So he raised the great Khalid, saying Umar ibn al-Khattab. He's supreme athlete he was, radiallahu anhu warda. In terms of Quraysh, all of the attributes of Quraysh in Jahiliyyah that were loved by Quraysh, he had supreme horseman, supreme swordsman, supreme wrestler, very articulate, radiallahu anhu warda, as we'll discuss later on, negotiator, diplomat, very firm upon justice. You can speak about them one by one. Okay, Umar had it all. And other qualities which weren't necessarily considered to be good qualities. And Umar espoused Jahiliyyah, living up to their principles, even of Maw'uda, of burying your daughters in the sand. Umar did it. In Jahiliyyah, Umar buried his own daughter alive inside of the sand. And he lived the law of Mecca to the T. And what they saw as virtues, he lived it all. Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab.
I once remember reading sort of vaguely that when he gave the mahar for Hazrat Ali, that it was 40,000 dinars. Is that something?
40,000, yeah, it's 40,000 dinars, huge, a mahar, dowry that Umar ibn al-Khattab gave to marry him, the daughter of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, and Fatima Zahra Batul, Kulthum. Yeah, 40,000, that's what's reported.
Subhanallah wal